chat with the editors of WSP and Wetlands. So we got a little bit rudely interrupted earlier today, but we are back and better than before, and we are ready to talk all about opportunities for students and also professionals, because I know a lot of our professionals are hanging around after our happy hour. If you've not yet included one of your publications in either of these two really fantastic outlets, hopefully this will be the talk that encourages you to do that. So I will hand it over to my co-moderator, Bill Morganti.
All right, we're going to start with actually introducing Ralph Tyner and actually dealing with questions with him before going to Marinus Ott. So first, let me just talk about Ralph. Ralph, as many of you know, is editor of Wetland Science and Practice in a wetland ecologist with 50 years of experience in wetlands. Ralph retired. Sorry for all those of you who are hearing this for the second time. We did get through this. That's as far as we got before. Okay, so Ralph did retire after 40 years from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where he actually oversaw the National Wetlands Inventory for the Northeast region, which was responsible for wetland mapping from Maine through Virginia. Ralph has written over 250 publications, including wetland field guides and books on a variety of wetland topics, including coastal wetlands, wetland functional assessment, remote sensing of wetlands, and the concept of wetlands and its application for field delineations and mapping. Ralph is a professional wetland scientist emeritus and a fellow of the Society of Wetland Scientists. Currently, he teaches courses at Rutgers Office of Continuing Professional Education on wetland plant ID and wetland delineation, in addition to being the editor for SWS's Wetland Science and Practice. So Ralph, welcome to the virtual student conference again, and beer with the editors.
Okay. Instead of good afternoon and then a quick goodbye, good evening. So Wetland Science and Practice, what is it? I mean, many of you students probably have already seen at least one issue or perhaps more than that ideally. But it was created as an applied wetland science journal, in addition to providing news on the current activities of the society and so on. So it provides an opportunity for folks to write about projects that they're working on. So initially, if you look at applied science, you'd say, well, okay, I'm working on a restoration project, I can write about it. You know, I don't have to write about the success right now. I can write about what I'm doing. So I'm, you know, creating this wetland here for this purpose, and these are my objectives, and this is what I go through, and these are the pictures before. And then you can follow it up later on with another article about the, you know, 1 year's, you know, revisited 1 year after, maybe 5 years, and so on and so forth. So you can put together a series if you wanted to. Basically, the journal is to provide you with opportunities to write about things that you're interested in. So if you're a student, you can be talking about your student chapter, what kind of activities you're doing, planning, and if you have a little symposia or something like that, you can have abstracts of those presentations and so on. I know so many people put together presentations for the society's meetings and other scientific meetings, and all you see is an abstract. And I mean, people put in hours for these presentations. But, you know, I don't think it takes really that much more. Once you've gone through the time and effort to put together a PowerPoint presentation, complete with graphics and everything else, I don't think it takes that much more time to put that together into a summary article for that's suitable for wetland science and practice. So as a student, you can write about what research you're working on. What are you doing? Where are you in the process? What do you look forward to in the future? What, you know, and so on. So they could be just preliminary findings. It doesn't preclude, you know, when you're done with your research, writing a more substantial scientific article for wetlands or another journal of your interest. You can also write about a topic that you're just interested in. You know, years ago when I first started writing, I was working with the state of South Carolina, and I was a marine biologist, got my first job as a marine biologist for the state. And so, well, I wrote an article for, I think it's Sport Fishing, what is it? The Sport Fishing Institute Bulletin on tidal marshes vital to marine fishes. So I wrote that. It was a contribution from the agency that I was working with, as well as, so it was published in 2 places. But that was like the beginning of it, other than my master's thesis and so on. So you can write about natural history. So if you're studying an organism, no matter what aspect of the organism you're working on, you can write about a little bit about its natural history or its biology, ecology, and so on and so forth. And maybe yeah, sure, you can find it in a book somewhere, but if you're interested in it, why not take a few minutes and write an article about it? You know, it's good for you and it's good for the readers. I mean, people like to read things about things they even know about. So it's a little different twist. Like I was reading an article, there's, I can't remember the person's name right now. Oh, Darren Lozan, who did a research. She got a research grant. She wrote up her final report, and I was reading through that. It was pretty interesting. And she said, well, what else can I do? I said, well, you can put a little introduction there. You could say about where you're headed with this project, and then put in some pictures of the critters, you know. So she did that and did a wonderful job, and that'll appear in our July issue. So it doesn't really have to be on your research. It could be aspects of the organisms you're working on, or plant communities, or whatever. We even have a section in the journal entitled Notes from the Field. And this is just like photographs of wetlands and critters that you've seen, and with a little caption, you know. It's become a piece that I end up writing for an issue or 2, depending on a trip I've been on, and if I've taken some nice photographs, and yeah, what am I doing on my computer? I'm also show it to people and put together a little story. So that's the kind of thing that you can do just on your own, you know. So you don't have to have a research project. You don't have to get funded for it. You could just say, well, I'm interested in salt flats of Utah, and write an article on it. You know, and it doesn't have to be a dissertation or anything. It could be just a five page or 2-page summary of the topic. You know, that's how you learn. I mean, that's a lot of my learning. My education has been writing. You know, so I have to do the research, particularly when you're writing books and so on. You know, you don't know everything that's in there. At least I don't. Maybe someone else does, but you do a lot of research, and it's a learning experience, you know. So these are the kind of opportunities that are available. They're virtually unlimited opportunities, and as a student, it gives you a first step in getting something published that you can take home to mom and dad and say, look, this is what I've done. Look, it's even an article, and it's a e-publication, it's color, you know, it's written in a format, most of the articles for the average citizen to understand. So those are opportunities that you shouldn't let go by. You know, I still have my master's thesis. I submitted an article years ago. It didn't get accepted by a journal, but I still have that laying around. And if things get really bad, you'll be reading them.
Ralph, can I mention one other way students
Sure.
can get published in WSP? You know, there happens to be, some of you may be familiar with an SWS initiative called SWS Wetlands of Distinction. You know, and this has to do with high-functioning wetlands that are cataloged on an interactive geospatial website. And well, currently there are 34 of these, actually international. There's now 33 in the US and 1 in Australia. And one way that we've been even promoting these wetlands of distinction is that there's been write-ups that have appeared in Wetland Science and Practice. But so far, there's actually only 2 that have been written up for Wetland Science and Practice. So there are still 32 wetlands of distinction that if any students want, you know, to be able to put something together. There's a lot of great information on the website already. I encourage you all to go to www.wetlandsofdistinction.org and check them out. And actually, I think, Stephanie, you did one of those, right?
Yes, I did. And I think that might be coming out in the next issue as well. I don't think it's...
That'll be in the July issue, yes.
Yes, awesome. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be my first foray into a WSP or wetlands publication. So I finally feel like I've made it in SWS. But one of the perks.
I'd like to give a shout out to Tatiana.
Yes.
She's written an article for it in the past. I can't remember the exact title of the article. She co-wrote it with a number of colleagues, but she's taken upon herself to an initiative to try to get Latin American folks together to write articles about what they're doing in Latin America. And so she's got a number of folks that she's already contacted, and they've agreed to it. I haven't seen their manuscripts, I've seen hers. But we're looking for those manuscripts by the end of June. So there's still like a good 3 weeks left on that. But I mean, and then we can always move it down. But what we're trying to do is try to get different regions to write about wetlands in their area. So that Latin America, there's a lot of questions about, well, what's going on down there? You know, we're an international organization. Most of the things we read about the US, at least that I've seen. So let's try to, find out what the students are doing, what the researchers are doing in those areas. They don't have to write a scientific article per se, but just a very informative thing about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what they hope to accomplish, and so on and so forth. And then you can contact various individuals if you want to know more about that particular topic. And so that's the purpose of Wetland Science and Practice. It's the society's journal for society members to write about things that they're interested in, and not have to go through all the research and so on and peer review that you need to get an accomplished article in Wetlands.
Ralph, there are a few questions that have come in from students.
Sure.
Can I pose them to you?
Sure.
Someone asked, what audience do I reach by publishing in WSP?
The audience that you reach would first of all be members initially, because the society is the initial issue of Wetland Science and Practice is for members only. However, once the next issue comes out, then it's available on the internet worldwide. So anyone could access it. So basically anybody with access can read it. So your audience is the
Excellent. Certainly a much
next
shorter lockdown period than a lot of other journals. So it's good to hear that. And I think that really resonates well with a lot of international students. And just sort of to reference back to your shout out to Tatiana, I think that's something that's really limited a lot of internationalization efforts and publication has been just the difficulty and the kind of mismatch in access that we have in the academies between North America, Europe, and other continents, other regions of the world. So having that open access option in as little as a few months, really, because WSP comes out quarterly, is actually really wonderful for our international members.
Yeah, and we have a quick turnaround. Even if you want peer reviewed, we have a number of peer-reviewed articles that we send out for review. Other than that, I'm reviewing it and just make sure it sounds reasonable. And I mean, someone writing about a project, what am I going to really criticize there other than, well, how they're conveying their information.
Absolutely.
Somebody else asked, does publication WSP prevent me from publishing on the same project elsewhere?
No, because basically what you would write in an article for WSP would be a more layman focused article. So it wouldn't necessarily have all the research that goes into in the literature review that basically would be required going into a scientific journal. So it doesn't. In many cases, it's a preliminary findings anyhow, and then people can, publish the full results elsewhere. This is more of a summary type of article.
Excellent. And I know certainly from the student perspective, at least, in addition to the Wetlands of Distinction initiative that we've started with the Wetlands of Distinction Committee and in partnership with you, Ralph, is that this is really a great avenue for building up your publications and getting that experience in writing. And I think certainly as a graduate student, I cannot tell you how many papers I've written for graduate courses that have really no home in a journal and no publication to really turn to, but WSP seems like it'd be a really great fit. So from now on, those will no longer be hours wasted on just writing a term paper. Those will hopefully make it into WSP pretty soon.
Yeah, as long as you make it interesting.
I mean, I like to think that my topics are interesting, but I suppose that is rather simple.
I just remember a paper I had to write one time. It was on some gland in a salamander or something. I don't think many people would be interested in that. But if you put it in the right perspective, you know, with a picture of the salamander and talk about the significance of that particular organ. It was organ of Jacobson was the organ.
Oh, great.
Tried to write a 20-page paper on that. And that was, it took a lot of creative writing.
But,
Anything else, Bill? Or
I mean, there was another question, but I think you kind of addressed this. Maybe you have anything else do you want to say about it? Just what types of articles are most suitable for publication WSP? You did talk about that, but anything else you want to add? Okay.
Not really. It's up to the, and if there's any questions, just send me a note. Say, look, I'm thinking about this topic and so on. Just so you can write about 3 sentences, and then I'll say, well, yeah, sounds good, or well, you better do a scientific article.
And I will say, definitely having gone through the experience, writing up the Glen Martin National Wildlife Refuge was the site that I wrote up for Wetlands of Distinction. It's a pretty painless experience. Ralph makes it quite straightforward what you need to do, what the expectations are. Now that I've gone through it, our Wetlands of Distinction Committee has a pretty good sense of what those publications should look like. They've got a template that you can follow. And I mean, I was very fortunate that I ended up writing up a site that Bill had originally nominated. So I was able to come to him for some questions. But certainly you're going to have support in the entire writing process. So I really strongly encourage you, if you are a student and you're interested in writing up any of these Wetlands of Distinction, maybe in your area, or maybe you want to get creative and explore a part of the world virtually that you haven't been to before and get to connect with somebody on the other side of the country, that's also great. So I really encourage you to look into that option.
Okay.
Great.
Guess we're ready to pass the baton.
I believe so. Marinus, are you ready?
Sure.
You're in the hot seat now.
All right. I'll drink a beer with that.
Oh, now I can have mine.
Come on, it's happy hour.
There's a lot of happy hours now.
That's right.
Happy days.
This is true.
Sure. So, Bill, do you introduce me or do I just start talking?
Well, there's I don't have the intro for you. This is a little embarrassing. Was I supposed to do that?
I sent something, I think.
You did. I will introduce you.
Thank you.
In the absence of this, I did not prepare something because I was feeling overconfident because I've seen you at so many meetings now.
That's the best way to do it.
We'll just wing it.
Yeah, sure.
So Marinus is a professor and a researcher in the Wet Ecosystem Research Group, and he's at North Dakota State University. So actually earlier in the day, we heard one of your undergraduate students present, so congratulations for that. That was an excellent student talk. The recording will be available later for everybody to listen to. I always like to humble brag on students because they make your advisors look so good.
Yeah, they do.
They really do. He has a master's in science and PhD from the Netherlands, and he is the current editor-in-chief for our Wetlands Journal. And if you've been around SWS at all, you've seen his face more times than you can count. I have to say, like, when I came to SWS to my first annual meeting, I think you were one of the first people I had a conversation with. And I know I've heard that echoed by a lot of other student members of the student section leadership team and just other students I've encountered at SWS. So I definitely think of you as a mentor for all students in the society and an accessible resource. So it's really a great privilege to have you join us tonight.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I do remember that, and there was beer involved, if I remember correctly as well. So, so before I say something here, this is what I'm drinking. Is the Castle, you can't see that, Castle Danger Cream Ale. Castle Danger, for those of you who live in Florida, for instance, is on the North Shore of Lake Superior. And it's just an amazing beer. So that's my plug for the beer. Let's
I thought
talk
you were
about
going to say it was Florida beer.
Oh, yeah.
It was on the North Shore of Lake Superior.
That's right.
How many have you had now, Morris?
Just today or over the past COVID period.
Beer consumption. North Dakota is #2 in beer consumption across the country.
They are. Today only not even one, so I'm just starting. So first of all, there were the two questions, and let me remember now what they were. One was what to do and what not to do. What was the other question? Was more important, actually. Do you remember?
Yes. So we had a question about any types of wetland research that are not appropriate to publish in WSP.
Right. And so the answer there is no. I can keep it at that, but no. When you look at Wetlands, the history of the journal, which is now also in its 40th year, I think, almost. We are actually building the 40th year edition. That's right, 40th volume. So when you look back, it was very much an American journal. And what that meant is that there were a lot of things published in it that had really very little application in, for instance, Europe. Things to do with wetland delineation. Wetland delineation in itself is because in America, we want to know where a wetland starts and ends for legal reasons. For most places in the world, that has no relevance whatsoever. If you go to, say, China, the government owns all the land, so that question is just useless. The underlying science is very important and applicable everywhere, but not papers on delineation. And you know, mitigation banking also arose from that. Didn't have much application really outside the United States. Particularly when I took over in 2012, things started changing, not just because of me, but also because everything went electronic. Daryl Batzer before me had just been part of moving to Springer and becoming entirely online. Whereas before him, Doug Wilcox did everything on paper. He would copy things and have, you know, triple copies and mark them himself and all that. Completely changed. With the with us joining Springer, the journal also went truly international. So if you look at the board, which is myself and then associate editors, and I have an assistant editor, that group really is truly global, where it started with only basically American-based scientists. Now we are expanding much more internationally. And when I came on board, I had already decided for myself that the journal needed to be about wetlands and anything to do with wetlands. And so now we're also publishing on wetland education, for instance, which in Asia is a huge thing. If you go to Taiwan, China, where I've been a lot, you go to a wetland, they don't just have the wetland there, they have a whole visitor center, and the topic of how you educate people in understanding wetlands is very important there. So we publish that. Social aspects of wetlands. We have always published some of that, but that's becoming more important. People's perceptions. Why wetlands make people happy. We have published on that. Just recently, one that is truly borderline, I accepted. There is a special feature, as we call it now, being built, and I'll say more about that whole thing in a minute. But it is about estuarine wetlands in China. So it is being edited by Junhong Bai, who I know very well. He's in Beijing Normal University. And I basically let him put the whole thing together. Well, there's one paper that they felt was appropriate, which is really about how to make concrete. And it's the use of concrete to improve sedimentation, to stabilize coastal wetlands. It's about concrete. But I let it go through because it is part of this special feature, okay? So if any of you are worried about it not being a good fit, just email me and I'll tell you what I think. And if I am not certain that I can bounce it off associate editors, of which, by the way, we now have 55, I think, on every continent except Antarctica. Still looking for one there. You know, actually, I have a bone to pick with Bill Mitch, because he says in his book, in some of the first sentences, that there are wetlands on every continent except Antarctica. And that is not true. There are wetlands there. So, but beside the point, there are no native Antarcticans who could write about it at the moment. So no associate editors there. The initiative that Ralph talked about, and you too, Stephanie, and others, about getting wetlands in South America written up more. I have, about half a year ago, I appointed an associate editor in Colombia, Juan Benavides. And just this morning, I wrote to a colleague, and now I forget where she's based, but she is a specialist in frogs, and we need another herp associate editor. So that is a long answer to that question. Everything, if it is about wetlands, not so much if it's about birds that never sit in wetlands but fly over them, and we have had those too. Not those. You know, but birds that depend on wetlands, yes. Otherwise, really anything. So I turned off Slack, by the way. I don't know if any questions are coming in, but my bandwidth is not great. So certainly interrupt me if there are questions that I need to answer. Otherwise, I'll move to the other one, the do's and don'ts. Can I share my screen to show the wetland sites?
You should be able to.
Okay, I'll try that. Yeah, there we go. Share. It's a bit small on my screen, but I'll make it bigger.
Perfect, you can see it.
So, because that sort of gives a guide to what to do, because I realized there was not much sense to it, is word count. We got rid of it. So, because too often I would get people write, and there was a word count of research articles 6,000, review papers 8,000. Really, if you make it more than 8,000, it has to be really good, because too long articles just get boring and nobody will read them. But if you need more than 6,000 to tell a good story, why not? So we got rid of that. When I started, color images were charged for. I wrote to Springer, said, that's nonsense. Everything is electronic, get rid of it. And they didn't balk at all. They said, yeah, okay, fine. And it was a lot of money. So color is free of charge. But for those of you, particularly students who have little experience, here are a few do's at least. Look carefully at the submission guidelines. Here they are. I hope you can all see that. And there's also submit a manuscript. If you go to the submission guidelines, it tells you exactly what you need. We had a discussion just recently about science. First of all, SI units, America, not feet or those acres. Acre feet are even worse. Meters, square meters, cubic meters, okay, SI units. this tells you a few things about what to do and what not. The discussion we had recently was about, should you separate results, the results section, from the discussion? If possible, yes, please do that, because it helps you with the analysis of your own thoughts. First, put together the results. It'll help you to understand, have you done the statistics well? Then you do the discussion, and that too adds to that. So if you can, yes. But there are fields, for instance, we have published on legal aspects of wetlands. There are no results in discussion, or, you know, not separate, but you can have other things, social sciences. There are interviews done, and interpretation of them needs to be presented and also discussed at the same time. So particularly those types of articles, we will allow that. In the end, it's up to the authors, but we prefer it separate. The other tip I can give to everybody is to go to this here, which is the journal itself. Can you all see that? I went to another window. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I wanted, that is not what yes, that is what I wanted. If you go down here, look at what other people have written and what it looks like. Take the style from that. And if you look at latest articles, you scroll through and you can do view all articles. And so article, you see the yellow ones there, but every now and then, this one doesn't have yellow. This one is open access. So even for those that might not have easy access to these because you need to sign in, you can look at the open access ones. And if you click on that, and this is a bit slow, so maybe I won't, oh, there it goes. You can then see the entire article and download the PDF. So a do is look at the instructions, look at what is published. Another do is make sure, and this goes, I had that discussion actually yesterday with people in my group, and today, the first choice for a journal needs to be that your work is a good fit with that journal. The first choice should not be, is the impact factor high? And I have that discussion particularly because the people in my lab are Chinese colleagues at the moment, and they tend to only look at impact factor, submit it to a journal, and then it's rejected because it's not a good fit. It needs to be a good fit. It needs to be for wetlands. It needs to be new. It needs to have something new there. If it's just a survey, and I'm not dismissing surveys, but if it is another survey of which we have had several, it might not be a good fit. So look at the fit, look at the instructions, and just to point out also, again, if you go to the submission guidelines, there is another tool that is really very useful. And let me see if I can find it now. Article types, all that, text, yes. There is help somewhere. Now, of course, I can't find it. There is help with, let me go back to the top. Let me see. Oh, there it is. English language editing. I don't know if you knew it's there, but you can go click on that. And you can go, there's a tutorial, but there's also Nature Research Editing Service. I won't click on it because earlier I had difficulty going back to previous windows, but that is a service that you can use, and first time use you get 10% off to help with the writing, which for students who are non-native speakers, particularly for any colleagues, is really very good. So the don'ts, don't try to put everything you have found under the sun in your article. Look at the story, look at the whole picture. If there are things that are not really relevant to the core of the story, but that you need to show, you can share them online. Online supplementary materials for the journal for papers are unlimited. You can upload entire movies if you want. It is unlimited. And so you can put raw data there, which I tend to do always, and any other peripheral information, statistics, things like that. So that's another don't. Don't try to put everything in there. Realize what you can do for one manuscript within that space of maybe 6 to 8, sometimes 9,000 words. I'll stop talking for a second and see if there are questions, because I don't want to be running out of time. Is there anything there?
We do not have any questions yet on the Slack. They might still be ideas that are percolating, but I just wanted to say thank you for your comment about impact factor, because that was actually something that had been asked previously. I had actually received a question about that from a student when we announced this.
Well, yeah, and
originally.
let me expand on why I say that's unimportant, really. Even though, so in places like China and some European countries, they have lists of journals that you should publish in and those that you shouldn't, based on impact factor. But most people don't realize how it's calculated. There are other metrics as well, but impact factor is simply the number of citations on average to an article from its dates of publication over 2 years. There is a 5-year impact factor that nobody looks at. It's a 2-year impact factor. So if your paper is published today and it is cited a few times within 2 years, then that counts towards the impact factor. Now, the problem is that a lot of work in wetland science is long-term research. So I always give this kind of example. My projects tend to be long-term. So say I know of a really important paper, you know, it's really very important to the kind of research I do. Now I do a project and it takes 3 years. And then I start writing it. And so maybe I have a publication after 4 years based on that work. I cite that article. My citation to that article does not contribute to its impact factor, because it was published 4 years ago and it is only calculated over the first 2 years. So Wetlands, the journal, suffers a bit from that, because a lot of what we do are long-term studies. Whereas if you are a physiologist, and I don't want to offend physiologists among us, but you do an experiment, it works or it doesn't, you publish it 3 months later. So you get much higher impact factors for physiological journals just because of that. There are many other things. Our competitor, published by Springer, Wetland Ecology and Management, that is a much smaller crowd of people and they all cite each other. That is why last year their impact factor went higher than ours. They get 100 submissions a year, we get 350, and we reject 70%. Not because we want to, because that's what happens. So all those things, the crux of it is impact factor has absolutely nothing to do with quality. And it is sad that a lot of places use that blindly, particularly, you know, the people that like to push pencils and count beans. So, you know, are there any other questions there?
I'm not seeing any new questions on the Slack, but I know we had kind of one, and maybe this is well-suited kind of concluding thought for both of you, since you've talked about the do's and don'ts of each journal. So maybe Marinus, if you could stop sharing your screen so we can get all the panelists back on in one window.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah.
There we go.
Done that.
Perfect, perfect. And that should help us a little bit with the lag. So what it sounds like is a little bit like WSP is a really great avenue for publishing these more process-based pieces, and then Wetlands would be a really great complement to that when you've completed the project. So does that sound correct to both of you? More or less?
I would say they're very different beasts.
Mhm.
WSP is a good place to, like Ralph said, talk and almost more informal, if you will, about the project. Whereas, and it is peer reviewed, but the peer review system for wetlands is very different in the sense that there are 55 specialists in the field that review it. And the wetlands is listed by abstracting services, the biosys systems and those. To my knowledge, I don't know, Ralph, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think WSP is. Um,
We
uh,
were, but then I think when things shifted in terms of the business office,
right.
then got lost.
Okay. Okay.
So we didn't even have the ISN number there. And
Okay.
now we have it on, so that we're attempting to get back into abstracting services.
Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
again, like I said, it's more informal, a less rigorous peer review and so on.
But an outstanding outlet to highlight some of the work you're doing. And you know, there are things not published in Wetlands that you can put in WSP. We do no longer have book reviews. They were a bit of a waste of our time. We don't have editorials. I thought about it. I discussed it with colleagues on the board. We're not doing it because it simply uses up pages that are not being read. But WSP is different that way. You can, you know, in a way, I should put editorials for wetlands in WSP, which we talked about, Ralph, but I haven't done yet, right?
Oh, but we do put notices whenever we get an advance notice of the journal. What's in the journal, we post that on a separate page. So
yeah, and one thing maybe that you should prompt me to talk about, or maybe you can write something. The production company of Wetlands, of Springer, I should say, so they subcontract this stuff. The people that put the issues together, they were attacked by a cyber attack. Oh, irony of ironies. And so papers got lost. It completely screwed up the production. And so the December issue for Wetlands only came out in April. Then the February one a bit later. We just about finished the June one right now. So we're kind of catching up. But that has been a real bummer, real delay. And may even have an effect on our impact factor and other metrics. I don't know yet. And then, of course, came COVID-19. So double whammy.
but there's more time for people to write now.
Yeah, so
A number of colleagues couldn't go on trips that they had planned with other colleagues and so on, so they have more opportunity to sit down and put together some of their research.
Yeah, I've seen an uptick in submissions, maybe partly to do with that. Another thing that I have done, just to mention, we need to be more international still. And so the growth is particularly in China. So I wrote to colleagues there, help, and I know quite a few people there by now because I've been going back and forth for several years. And they're doing that. They're putting together special issues and what have you. Now I'm trying to get into more South America. I forgot to mention that, but we are going also to a model of continuous publishing. And that will be within a year. So what it means is that the moment your paper is accepted, it is considered published. It's no longer waiting for volumes and page numbers. So that should happen within a year. And why that is relevant to the special issues and special features is because that's kind of out the door. What we'll have now is topical collections. And I will invite, and I hope the next editor-in-chief, people to every now and then write summary articles, if you will, about those topical collections. But that's in the future. So. And word on the street is that the impact factor, which means absolutely nothing, just went over 2. But I don't know. I haven't seen the official. There's actually a colleague from China who told me that. And somehow he knows, but yeah. Yeah, so that's all I have. Stephanie, your call. Ralph, I don't know if you want to say more.
Well, that's it on my end. Bill, do you have any closing thoughts to lead us out?
Nope, I think this was really informative. I'd really like to thank Ralph. I would like to thank Marinus. And actually, I'd like to actually really thank Stephanie
Yes.
and David for putting this all together. And in spite of the obstacles today, to really make this happen again. So thank you all. This is
No,
really
thank
great.
you.